I was originally going to do other videos talking about Turkish Airlines and United Airlines, as well as a rant about ITA Airways, but I decided I'd postpone all of those and instead make this video instead about predictions that I have for this year, which is something I probably should have done a few weeks ago before the turn of the year, but anyway, I guess it's better late than never. So, what were my predictions exactly? I made a list of about 25 predictions, and I would like to clarify that when I mention my predictions, and when I mention specific routes, I don't necessarily mean that their route will be launched this year, but rather that they're going to be announced. In most cases, they may not even launch this year, but rather next year. Now, in some cases, I mentioned several routes, but I should clarify that just because I mentioned two or three routes, it doesn't mean that I think all five of them are going to happen, but rather that maybe one or two of those is going to happen. I also want to mention that for each prediction, there is always a reason why I may be making such predictions, and I'll explain it for each one of them. Starting with my main prediction of the year. Now, I know I'm pretty late in making this video, so in a way, this prediction already came true, and that is Play Airlines adding at least one or two North American destinations, with my top picks being the likes of Hartford, Newark, Philadelphia, Toronto, Pearson, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland. And now the reason why I put this as number one is because Play is already launching flights to Toronto, as they just announced on January 10th, but it's not to Pearson that they're flying to, but rather Hamilton, which I think is pretty interesting. And it actually makes sense to me why they chose Hamilton instead of Pearson, but I'm not going to get much into it now. Maybe I'll go over it in another video. But the reason I made this prediction was because Play launched 4 routes to the US last year, so it only made sense for them to keep expanding this year, with more cities to North America as well as Europe. I mainly chose cities that are in between their current destinations, with Hartford being in between New York and Boston, and Philadelphia between New York and DC. New York is much closer to the New York area and New Jersey suburbs, while Pittsburgh and Cleveland are very underserved in the Transatlantic market. Prediction number two is JetBlue is going to announce another European destination. My top picks are Dublin and Barcelona, but maybe Amsterdam and other UK cities are also possible. See, JetBlue recently mentioned that they're going to begin flying to Paris Charles de Gaulle this year from New York, and they'll likely announce Boston to Paris soon as well. And while since JetBlue still has several of the Airbus A321 LR on order, I think it increases the possibility for one or two more destinations. For example, you have Dublin, which is a pretty important market from New York. Barcelona may also be possible, being a popular tourist destination with a lot of demand, but no flights to Boston. Amsterdam is also a pretty busy route with loads of business and tourism, so that may be a possibility as well. Number 3. American Airlines will announce their first flights for the Airbus A321 XLR. And actually, I'm not entirely sure which routes they would be, but I would guess it would be either one of the transcontinental routes where the A321T currently flies, such as Los Angeles to New York, or transatlantic flights from Philadelphia for the 2024 winter season when demand is lower to Europe, and therefore turning some of their routes such as Lisbon, Barcelona, or Venice into year-round flights. I honestly don't think the aircraft will be deployed to South America from Miami in 2024, but American can always end up announcing year-round flights to Montevideo maybe. Prediction 4 is American will announce the return of Dallas to Hong Kong, as well as new flights from Seattle to Shanghai, as demand towards China begins to pick up. This flight was originally meant to begin in 2020 before the Rona happened, but it was cancelled. Dallas to Tel Aviv was another prediction that I made, and I still stand with it, despite Americans' recent cancellation of Miami to Tel Aviv flights. But the reason I still stand by it is because American simply has a lot more connections from DFW than Miami, as well as lacking competition from El Al, which also flies to Miami. Number 5, I'm sure Turkish Airlines is going to begin flying to Denver and Detroit this year, and notice I said will begin flying. I didn't say announce because they basically already announced these destinations. And I think they originally were planning to start flying there in 2022, but because of delays in the Boeing 787 deliveries, this aircraft didn't come out in time for the 2022 summer season. So now that Boeing is once again delivering the 787s, Turkish may get the aircraft needed to fly these routes this year. I also think that this year they may announce flights to Orlando and Las Vegas, both of which have been on Turkish radar in recent years, especially Orlando. But we're gonna have to wait and see. Number 6. United Airlines is going to announce another massive long-haul expansion similar to last year. Now, I'm not exactly sure what destinations they're going to target this year specifically, but here are some ideas. First of all, the resumption of flights between Washington Dulles and Sao Paulo Guarulhos, and Newark to Manchester. Others could be Denver to Dublin, since Denver has been eyeing more European flying. I think Dublin may be a good option. I can also see routes that are unserved by United, like Chicago to Madrid or Washington to Milan Malpensa, New York to Prague, Dusseldorf or Valencia, maybe even New York to Lagos. especially now that Delta has terminated New York JFK to Lagos, as well as Los Angeles to Brisbane as part of the partnership with Virgin Australia. I also included in this prediction Houston to Tel Aviv, Paris, Lagos, and or Melbourne. These are probably not realistic, but I'm from Houston, so I love to fantasize. Now, Delta Airlines, and on here I have 5 different predictions. Number 7, there will be more flights launched to South America and announced as part of the Delta LatAm Airlines joint venture. My top routes in this are Lima to either Boston, Chicago, or Las Vegas, and Detroit to Sao Paulo Guarulhos, but maybe we could see Atlanta to Fortaleza and New York to Rio de Janeiro. Number 8, I can also see another long-haul expansion outside of Latin America, including a Boston expansion to Portland, Oregon, Brussels, and Milan, as well as Atlanta to Lisbon and Minneapolis or Detroit to Dublin, as well as maybe Los Angeles to Auckland, New Zealand, probably on a seasonal basis. Another prediction is new flights from North America to Paris, which could be operated by either Delta or Air France, one of the two, including Paris to San Diego and Paris to Nashville, both of which seem to want more transatlantic connections, and for good reason. San Diego currently only has flights to London and Munich via British Airways and Lufthansa respectively, and Nashville only has British Airways to London. Portland to Paris may be also possible. Delta used to fly Portland to London, but since British Airways has taken the route, maybe Delta could announce Portland to Paris instead. Other routes that I can also see happening are in the Midwest, with Pittsburgh and Indianapolis having had flights to Paris before the pandemic, both of them being suspended at the moment. We can expect a return to one of these cities, although we can possibly see Columbus instead. In this prediction, I also want to include Guadalajara and Monterrey in Mexico to Paris, operated by either Aeromexico or Air France, given the success of their own flights to Madrid. Similarly, number 10, I can also see the return of flights to Amsterdam from one of two of the following cities, Cincinnati, Raleigh, or Tampa, all of which used to be flown by Delta before the pandemic. Number 11. Virgin Atlantic and Delta could also launch their own share of flights to North America thanks to the slots given to Virgin Atlantic because of the sanctions put on Aeroflot. The possible routes, in my opinion, are possibly Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Salt Lake City, both of which are Delta Airlines hubs, especially now that Virgin Atlantic is joining the SkyTeam Alliance. And the other one is Denver, which I think Virgin Atlantic has shown interest in. And I'm sure demand is great to this city, and it could do well despite the competition with United and British Airways. Now, getting out of the Delta predictions, number 12, Aer Lingus, I'm sure may announce a new destination from Dublin. There's demand from several cities to London, but Dublin can also provide many connections to several smaller cities in the UK, which is probably why they announced they're going to resume flights to Hartford and will begin flying to Cleveland this year as well. Meanwhile, I would also expect them to add more destinations, especially as the Airbus A321XLRs are expected to arrive next year. And as Aer Lingus is bringing back aircraft from storage, my top predictions for this are Denver, Nashville, and Raleigh-Durham. The reason I chose these cities is because, as I mentioned before, Denver, Nashville, and Raleigh seem interested in new flights to Dublin, the two latter being very fast-growing cities that already need new flights to Europe. I don't have any predictions for Lufthansa, but similarly, number 13, Raleigh-Durham and Nashville are my guesses. I know I've mentioned Nashville and Raleigh-Durham many times, but similar to how Austin has been getting several transatlantic flights lately, Raleigh and Nashville are also looking to get some of their own. Number 14, British Airways. I think it would be great for them to return to Charleston, South Carolina, but since several cities in the Midwest are aiming for transatlantic flights, BA is adding frequencies to Pittsburgh while launching flights to Cincinnati. So I don't think they're going to aim for Ohio, but Columbus is possible. Not Cleveland because Aer Lingus can fly passengers to Heathrow via Dublin. My other guesses are Indianapolis, St. Louis, and Kansas City, especially the two former, since it's possible that Indianapolis may not get their flights to Paris back. BA could probably step in. When it comes to St. Louis, they already got Lufthansa, but they could get BA for the demand into London, while Lufthansa can focus more on the connecting demand in comparison. Number 15, Icelandair using the Boeing 737 MAX, they could resume flights to Cleveland or Pittsburgh, possibly to prevent Play Airlines from entering such markets, similar to how they did in Detroit, where Play originally wanted to fly, but maybe they could resume flights to Kansas City or begin flights to St. Louis or Columbus, depending on whether other European airlines decide to fly to some of these cities. Number 16, Alaska Airlines may launch new routes from Seattle. My main guess would be Hartford, which is one of the largest unserved markets from Seattle, especially with its location between Boston and New York, that could maybe attract passengers from nearby areas like New Haven and parts of Massachusetts. Other possible routes could be Des Moines, Iowa, Memphis, Tennessee, or Jacksonville, Florida. Number 17, Air Canada may go on a long-haul expansion with possible flights to Melbourne, Australia from Vancouver, as well as possibly Vancouver to Washington Dulles and Orlando. From Toronto, we could see flights to Berlin, Milan, or Prague maybe. But I wonder if Bucharest flights could also resume, as well as Montreal to Bordeaux, and maybe to Dubai as part of the closure agreement between Air Canada and Emirates. All the possibilities I see are short-haul flights from Toronto to Omaha, San Antonio, Jacksonville, Monterrey, and Guadalajara maybe, especially now with the Airbus A220. Number 18. It is known that Norse Atlantic will launch flights between Paris and New York, as well as London to several US cities. They've hinted at Fort Lauderdale, Los Angeles, Boston, and Orlando, as well as Washington and others. But I'm going to shy away from that, and instead I'm going to mention a different set of destinations that they're going to announce, such as Paris to Fort Lauderdale, Paris to Orlando, both being marked as they currently have no flights, but maybe we could also see flights being announced from Oslo, Berlin, and Paris to Bangkok and Phuket in Thailand, especially during the winter season. At number 19, I do wonder if Iberia may launch direct flights from Seattle, Alaska Airlines' main hub, especially now that Alaska just joined the One World Alliance, and since Iberia launched flights to Dallas and Washington this year. But in this, maybe Finnair could also probably begin flights to Philadelphia, which is a hub for American Airlines, but I don't know how likely that is. Number 20, I think ITA will begin flights to Mumbai. They already fly to Delhi, which I think was a pretty good move because of the Indian diaspora in Italy, but also due to all the connections that are possible at Rome to North America. I think it would be a great move if they announced such a flight. I was originally going to mention San Francisco and Washington Dulles from Rome, but those were announced right before year's end, so instead I'm going to mention Toronto, Chicago O'Hare, and Seattle Tacoma. The two former have a lot of demand into Italy, while Seattle is a hub for Delta Airlines. Number 21. Azul Brazilian Airlines will probably launch a couple of flights to the US. Campinas to New York, JFK will be a good one. Azul was planning on flying the route back in 2020, but the pandemic ruined all of those plans. I could also see the resumption of flights between Belo Horizonte and Fort Lauderdale, as well as new flights from Recife to New York, but I'm not so sure about the latter. Number 22, LOT Polish Airlines will probably announce flights to Washington Dulles and San Francisco, both of which are United Airlines hubs that I'm sure got plenty of demand from Poland and Eastern Europe overall. I should clarify that I used to think the LOT was going to begin flying to Boston, but I don't think that was actually true, but it may or may not happen. Number 23, I can see Vietnam Airlines adding a new destination in North America. My best guesses would be Vancouver to serve the Vietnamese population in Canada, but also Los Angeles, which also has a high Vietnamese population. And it's a place where passengers can also connect onto other USCs with high Vietnamese population like Houston or Dallas. Number 24, Avianca may launch flights from Bogota to Chicago or Tampa. There are pretty high possibilities, in my opinion, with both cities being important destinations from Latin America. Similarly, they could also announce the return of San Salvador to Chicago, which they used to fly before the pandemic. I would also love to see flights between Medellin and Houston, but this could be done on United Airlines as well. Finally, number 25. I have a feeling that this may be the year that Ethiopian Airlines may announce their return to Houston Intercontinental via Lome. They have mentioned that they do plan on returning to the city, and I can already see that. My reasoning is well. Ethiopian currently operates daily flights between Addis Ababa and Chicago, Washington, and Toronto, with a stopover in Dublin on the outbound flight, as well as 4 weekly flights to New York, 3 weekly to New York JFK, and 3 weekly to Washington Dulles. All of these operate with a stop at Lome and Togo. This is going to change though. The JFK stopover is going to change to Abidjan 3 times per week. New York via Lome will become daily, and Washington via Lome is going to stay 3 times weekly. And I should also mention that yesterday it was announced that Ethiopian Airlines is going to fly to Atlanta from Addis Ababa via Dublin on the outbound flight. So that's going to be 4 times per week. So I just thought I would mention that. Now, this leaves Lome with 10 flights per week. And now I think that the Washington flight may become a 4 weekly service. And they may once again bring back Addis to Houston via Lome, bringing Addis to Lome flights to 14 times per week or 2 daily. This logic may be flawed, but I don't know. I'm from Houston, so I really want Ethiopian Airlines back. Those are all my main predictions, but I'd like to also tell y'all some honorable mentions. Fiji Airways to Dallas Fort Worth, Qantas from Brisbane to either Dallas or Chicago, and Sydney to Seattle Tacoma. Gulf Air will begin flights to New York, which they've hinted at recently, and which they haven't flown in decades, as well as the possibility for Air India to begin flights to Canada from Bangalore to Vancouver or possibly Mumbai to Toronto due to the large Indian diaspora in the country. And well, I don't really know how many of these predictions are going to come true. Actually, I don't even know if any of them will come true. They're just my guesses based on my own analysis and observations and rumors that I've seen online, so they're not just random guesses for the most part. I can see some of these actually happening. But what do y'all think? Do I make sense or am I delusional? Please let me know. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If y'all got any questions, comments, feedback, or any suggestions, y'all can leave a comment. That's all I got to say, and I'll see y'all later.